Before I continue with the title of my English as used in ASL for Deaf Life, I have an idea of how I think about that English in ASL. My parents are hearing, and I am, of course, deaf. My mother had German measles or rubella when she was 6 months pregnant with me. My grandmother said that it could cause crippling disease, blindness, deafness, but she didn't tell my mother. My mother was totally unaware of that possibility. When I was born, the doctor stated that I was a healthy baby. When I was 1.5 years of age, I was a very alert baby. My mother thought nothing of it, and life went on. And then one day, my mother was in the living room, and I was in the crib playing with toys, very intent in those. And as she entered the room, she said, "Matthew, Matthew." But there was no response. Again, there was a crib, and immediately when she came over the edge, I looked up, and she suspected that something was wrong and that I was deaf. So she brought me to the doctor, who did many tests and declared, in fact, that I was deaf, but very bright, very bright. But they couldn't accept that I was deaf. He can't be deaf. He has to be a normal kid. He has to fix him. And so there was this ongoing struggle. After some time, though, my mother really had to think about what to do. You know, what could the doctor do? Now the doctor said, "Go to the Indiana School for the Deaf." And my mother thought, okay, and brought me there. No. My mother went alone and was very impressed with the program. And at that time, what was that, 1962, 63, something like that. They used a total communication approach of speech reading or speech and sign. But she was very impressed on her visit there. They brought me to the school. However, before I went to the school, I always thought the world depended on lip reading. That's just what I thought, because that's what I saw my parents would. Well, I could see their lips moving, and I just thought that's all there was. I had no idea that there was sound. And then, of course, on TV, I would look and I assumed, again, all there was speech reading. I didn't know that there was sound attached to it. And so, "Do you want a cookie?" And I would speech read that. "Milk?" "Yeah, I got that. But I wanted to survive with communication with my mother. That was my need at the time. They brought me to Ball State University. And that was the first school program that taught deaf children speech reading. And as I entered, it was like deaf kids and their signing and all that kind of stuff. And I was like perplexed as to what that was going on, all this waving around. They put the old phonic ear with the hearing aid with the thing. And they would say Paul. And then, again, before Paul, dog was my favorite word at the time. So dog was the favorite word. And then after a few months at that school in speech reading, I thought, well, maybe that's it. I've improved my speech reading skills. And then I would Matthew more, but again, absent of voice. Then I went to school. And again, the School for the Deaf, Indiana School for the Deaf. And they brought me there and I was crying. Or my mother was crying. And she brings me into this huge room with this whole huge auditorium of deaf kids signing and waving around and all that kind of thing. And I was like, what is this? And I stood off to the side because I was totally afraid of everything that I saw. And then I watched, and it was, I think, noon, and they gathered all the kids in single file or double file and went to the lunchroom. And on the wall in the lunchroom, there was all these, the alphabet fingerspelling listed on the wall. And at that time, I could write the word dog. Mom and Matthew, my mother had taught me that. And of course, my favorite word was dog. So I looked on the wall, D, yeah. And then I copied that finger-spelled letter, D-O-G. Oh. And the supervisor said, write, D-O-G, the finger-spelled. And this is a signed dog. And gave me the sign, and I made the connection. And it was incredible, because I was just like, wanted to communicate so much, and I wanted to explain what's this, what's the sign for this, what's the sign for that, chair, and everything I wanted to learn. I was so eager to learn. And they wanted to, hold me down, but no, I wanted to sign, I wanted to learn everything. I was very lucky to have a class name named Tom Holcomb. And, I knew that meant sign. Tom was my best friend, since a very young age. And we would sign together and talk. And I learned ASL from him. And, at the time I didn't realize that, but I really thank him for being my good friend way back then. Nevertheless, as school went on, kids were required to take speech therapy class, as usual. And I went in there and I thought, well, I'll learn. But sadly to say, every time that I made a mistake, they would whack me across the cheek. And I make a mistake and whack right across the cheek. Well, from that day on, I stopped using my voice. I refuse to use my voice, and still to this day I do. Refuse. So that was my sign of protest, to the hearing world. I'm deaf. I don't have to use my voice. I can communicate. We've got interpreters. I sign. I have a language. And stop oppressing me with this use of speech. But the speech therapist says, you got to do this, and I'm going, no. I can communicate by moving my lips, and I can sign. It's very easy. Matthew Moore. I'm a graduate from RIT. It's very clear on my lips. And people say, why don't you use your voice? You can't force a blind person to see. You can't force them to see color. And I won't use my voice in the same manner. I've had years and years and years of training. But all that aside, I wanted to focus on reading and writing. And my teachers knew that, and knew that I was very bright, very brilliant. And so they would teach me to read and write. So growing up in high school, I would read and write, read and write, read and write, and read and write. It was a lot of work, but I'd like to thank that experience that I had at the School for the Deaf, because I became bilingual, competent in English and ASL, and I can switch back and forth between the two. I'm very proud of that experience. I worked very hard to make sure that I could function on my own. Graduating from high school, I decided to go to NTID right here. And the reason was, at that time, I had peer pressure. Gallaudet, let's go to Gallaudet. That was the peer pressure to go to Gallaudet. And I didn't want to follow the herd. I wanted to be independent, follow my own course at NTID. I wanted to have experience in the world. I didn't want to be in the big huddle with all the deaf people. I wanted to meet and be exposed to the whole world and what life was all about. I'm very happy that I went to a school for the deaf. But I want to get along with deaf and hearing people. And so I graduated from NTID. My mother came here. Before coming here, my mother was really impressed and loved it. And was thrilled the fact that they were both hearing and deaf students here. But for the first time, I met pure oral. From School for the Deaf, you're exposed limitedly to the world. I came here, and what I met was incredible. I met the first person that used oral method exclusively. So I walked up, and I could see this, and I'm going like, what? So I went up, and I, went full steam ahead and went up to meet them, and I'm going, how can you do that? Use your voice if you can't hear it. And they go, well, that's the way I was raised. But I don't get it. You know? We can see a variety of methods here. A lot of deaf people in the community using different modes of communication. Now, every student that comes into NTID is required to take speech reading classes. Well, you have a pre-screening test, and you're evaluated all the students are evaluated. But they said, please, take this test. But I refused to use my voice. I refused. And I set it aside. And they go, no, please, you're required to do this before you can go on. You have to speak into the recording, and, we have to have proper placement in class. And I go, what for? Not using my voice, however, but what for? This went on, this wrangling for 30 minutes. And my mother go, please, just go ahead and do it. And I go, oh, well, okay, Mom. So I got the paper, and I used my worst speech. And I went, blah, used my worst voice. And they went, oh, beautiful. What beautiful voice you have. Oh, you speak so well. And I'm going like, yeah, Mom. They say I have good speech. No, it wasn't good. And I said, stop this. And so forever, I was not going to use my voice. Oh, I took speech classes while I was here. I took the required courses. And I used my voice, if, I would see in the speech class, the teacher would say, oh, you should use your voice. It's very good. And I'm sorry, but I won't. So through all these college years, I grew a lot here at the School for the Deaf. I was a very quiet kid. I like to observe the world more. But here at NTID, I met so many people and learned so much about so many things. Political issues, the deaf community, English, ASL, oralism, hard of hearing people. Just a myriad of things. I was bombarded and overwhelmed with everything that I was exposed to and learned here. Also, I met a lot of deaf people that did not have English competency, or they did. They went to schools for the deaf, and they talked about books and literature and health and Shakespeare, and could not really discuss these topics. And they would complain that they didn't have English skills, and I could see that upon graduation from here with a bachelor's degree in social work. I left with the feeling that there was something, some way I wanted to contribute to the deaf community. I worked as a VR counselor. I wasn't happy working one-on-one and trying to help them in their situation. But I felt empty with that. Now I remember in my college years I was a performer, an actor here on this very stage. This was like my second home. And I realized that I had a feeling of needing to use the media or publishing or TV in some way. And I had a TV show, Deaf magazine, a half-an-hour program. And I thought, let's give it a wing. Let's try that. It was broadcast on Channel 13. I was thrilled. People really wanted more programs of this type. And they wrote in. But it was the wrong time. We wrote for grants and all, but the show, I was frustrated with the show and not getting the support that I needed. Then Charles Bancroft and I sat down and we thought, we've got to do something. How are we going to do this? And I thought, well, do we have a magazine for the deaf community? And he says, yeah. The NTID broadcaster and, different magazines, independent. Newspapers, yes. But a magazine, high quality. No, there wasn't any such thing. And I thought, let's proceed. So we thought of Deaf Life. And people said, Deaf Life. And I thought, well, growing up, they'd say, this is Deaf Life. That's what it is. Meaning that's the way you had to accept it. That's the way it was. the magazine name of Deaf Life. 2 years. It was very difficult. And the reason was that primarily we have a deaf group. And they said, you can't. That was a prevailing attitude. But then I did get support saying we need it. Oh yeah, we need it. But the deaf community again said, you can't. But I'm sitting there thinking, deaf people can be very cruel sometimes. This ongoing struggle of hearing people saying, being supportive in the deaf community saying you can't. But now, English, with the perspective ASL, I don't know. We can try that issue. The deaf think in ASL, but it's written in English. And I wanted to come up with a way to help the deaf people improve the reading skills. So I used parentheses. And it would say not clear, I wanted to say I used that. But boy, the hearing people said, I don't like that. It's very disturbing to say those parentheses. It interrupts the flow. But then the deaf people say, oh, I love it. It really helped me. It improved my reading. I don't have no longer to go to the dictionary to figure out things. So the use of parentheses to clarify something was very helpful. But then others had the response that, what do you think, I'm a baby, I can't read? Well, you can't satisfy everyone. It's very difficult. It's been almost 3 years struggle of this going on and on. So the final solution is the use of footnotes. You have a column of text, and then the use of 1, 2, 3, and then the use of footnotes to further clarify that vocabulary or whatever. So I've used 3 deaf people that come, that read the script, and then underline the words that they feel that are unclear. And if all 3 people have identified the same vocabulary, then that's the one that we will use a footnote to further clarify. Now the hearing people said, you mean deaf people don't know that word? And then we'd say, no, this is for further clarification. So in general, people are becoming more accepting, and people are coming up to me and say the footnotes are very helpful because I can refer back to them. And very often they say, the parentheses are much easier. I hate to have to turn pages to see the footnote. The parentheses right next to the word is much easier. For the first 2 years, as I said, it was very difficult for me, as I said. The 3rd year became much easier because the deaf community finally, it's like, oh, you're here, it's working, oh, you're very talented. You're not a hearing person? They said, oh, you must be a hearing person if you can write English with such a skill. And when I'd make presentations, they say, oh, you're a hearing person. And they go, oh, no, I'm deaf. And they, oh, you must have been mainstreamed. And I went, no, I went to a school for the deaf. The assumption is always that it's from a hearing community. No, Deaf Life is from the perspective of a person from a school for the deaf. And that's the way it's going to be run. All of NDID alumni are involved. I have several Gallaudet students come up to me and say, now Matthew, we're very proud of you at Gallaudet. You beat us. You came up with a magazine. And you're quite skilled in your use of English, and have now congratulated me. Now, the 3rd year, we're starting to see a real upswing. But we've made one mistake. I can share that with you. We've made an error. We have a college. We have one deaf guy that have come, and they're reading, and they go, oh, tremendous article. lost 1,100 subscribers. 1,100 subscribers in 1 month alone. Because of the uproar over this whole thing. So the criticism we received was immense because of this one error. Oops. What I've learned is that deaf people are not open-minded as I had thought. Big mistake on my part. But in reading that, they did read it. However, it was a huge drop in subscribers and circulation. But as we get beyond that, and as I've made presentations all out, and I've outlined in those errors, I can see that it needs to be a monthly magazine. Still, they're saying that we should have a bi-monthly. We need a little time to breathe. We need time to think. We need time for creativity. It's a real drain, and it's a lot of work to have a monthly magazine. However, we've done that. Yeah, we did lose those subscribers. Take it on the chin, but after the years, we've lost about $20,000. Second year, we lost $25,000. In the third year, we've lost $5,000. But at the fifth anniversary, we broke even. Whew. Deaf Life is still growing. But still, we struggle with English and ASL issues. Many people say, why don't you write in ASL? And I say, I can't. It's more work to write in ASL. I'd have to think, make the translation, and put that in ASL. And then how we're hearing people say, deaf people don't have any English skills. So it's a struggle for me. And I've tried to decide how to make this presentation to the deaf community in English. And yet make it simple. But you can't really keep it that simple. You know, there's vocabulary issues. You know, we have to think of money too. The finances. And the implications that has. I've asked the community how they think of Deaf Life. And they say, well, to be honest, you know, the English is very difficult to me. I want more pictures. More pictures in the magazine. And I'm thinking, okay, you're right. Okay. I can accept that. Let's see. But to have more photographs is more expensive. And I have a limited budget. So what we'll continue to do is make modifications and grow as a magazine. Deaf Life belongs to the deaf community. I'm trying my best to keep it the English simple. English structure. It's yet still a challenge to accomplish that. Now, from Deaf Life to writing the book for hearing people only. Right now, I've sold approximately 40,000 copies in 2.5 years. Yeah, it's been published. And it's very popular with hearing people. That book is the most commonly asked question is that it was good, that it was written in English, and yet it conveyed the essence to hearing people. Was it had a lot of big words in it, you know, very technical words, and they'd think, wow, these deaf people are brilliant, because I wrote it in a style of English that would impress them. And however, going all around, do you think that all deaf people are like that? And I'd like to say yes. However, there's a real variety, as there are with hearing people. Their reading and writing competencies. Everyone are individuals. But very often, I'm happy to say as I travel that I'm exposing myself to a myriad of deaf people. They very often hearing people ask, why can't you talk? Why don't you use your voice? You sign so well, you dress so well. Why don't you use your voice? And I say, I am deaf, and I'd rather not use my voice. I write well. I can present well in ASL and sign, and that should set well itself. As I work on another book called Great Deaf Americans, there's another problem. English. The English level. I want it available to deaf people. And I want them to appreciate their culture. There's over 60 deaf people that I'm trying to include. This should be recognized. Still, I'm learning about the publishing world. Still, it's a challenge. English is a challenge. Again, it's not my first language. It's my second language. And so sometimes my English is like, I'll type, prepare material, and then I'll look and, S's. ES or S, or I have absent S's. It's very difficult in my English, and I look back at things that I've written. I think that I've covered everything. However, the most important thing is that for the deaf community, the hearing community needs to respect each deaf person as an individual for their individual talents. And don't try and squelch theirs or their need for English or their ability. Don't destroy their self-esteem, please. They're trying their best. We need to help them to understand the foreign language that is English. If we all work together and teach deaf people to appreciate the English language, I think that we can get along fine. I thank you. Oh, Matthew. Okay, we have just a bit of time left. Perhaps we could have a few questions from the audience. And before we do that, I would like to thank our two interpreters, Meredith Ray and Cynthia Johnson. I thank you. Now, any questions, please feel free to raise your hands. We'll raise the lights. Okay, if we would please, if we have a question, please come forward and sign those. Oh, I would be interested in your experiences in growing up at a school for the deaf. The teachers, did they use ASL or English or a mixture? Well, in English classes, all my teachers used ASL to teach English. And all that was is they'd use a blackboard and write English sentences, phrases, and then would sign it in ASL. So I'd make the connection between the written English and the signed version. I had two hearing teachers, actually. They were my favorites. And they were impressed with me and said, English is not your first language, it's your second, okay? If you're having problems, it's understandable. And I'm thinking, so I could make that distinction. Now they would use a vocabulary word and put that on there, and they'd say vague, and then sign vague. And I made that connection between the printed English word and the sign. And then they would further clarify that with not clear. So as I learned, 100 new vocabulary words every week. And we would have that 100 words on a Friday test. When they take that word from the magazine or newspaper and put it down, and I'd have to identify the vocabulary, the adjectives, the verbs, etc., and then what it means, and then use it in a sentence. Again, this is 100 words every week. Wow. College days, I feel like high school. Any other questions? Please, I'd like to open it up. and the interpreter could sign that or voice that as necessary. Do I have to stand? Whatever you want to do. I'll do it from here. Okay, I'll go down. Okay. Are deaf people smart? And then how can you say yes they can or no they can't? How they express it, they're brilliant. And what did you mean by that? They were brilliant based on their English skills or not? There's different ways of answering your question. When you're talking about English competency, deaf people have English competencies, although there's some that don't, as is true of hearing people. But if you were to use ASL, you wouldn't identify that. All this ing, I, shin, shun, and ness, and all that kind of ness and all that, it's very confusing when you're trying to sign English that way. ASL is very natural and very clear. And you can use ASL to teach English. And also you can be very proud of that language because of its own structure. There's a linguistic view and how you express themselves better and how they communicate with other deaf people. We don't want to confuse that. Some deaf people can't communicate with one another. But with ASL, it's very clear. In the theater, we have very big signs, and there's a conservation of space here. There's different ways of using ASL. You with a hat. Did your family and everyone in your family, your parents, all know ASL? Can you repeat that question? Let's do the question again. They asked, how did my family react when I learned sign? Well, my mother and father didn't sign. They could fingerspell a little bit, and I would speech read them growing up. I was spoiled. I would use my speech reading. I got in the habit of doing that. But when they came to visit with me, they were exposed to deaf people as they had never been before. Everyone signing an ASL. They were lost. But it was good. Because at the dinner table, I'd say what they say, what they say. And now the reverse is true. She'd say what they say, what they say, what they say. And I'd tell her, never mind, I'll tell you later. Some of my mothers had this experience, and I am thrilled. The next question. I can't say. In writing this story, you're exposing deaf people to all this material. Do you do it in different ethnic cultures, like exposing people to? Do you have an Asian deaf person, a black deaf person that assist you in writing, so you have that different perspective? Or are you all white? We have written stories in Asians about the blacks of whites. We have done some stories on the black culture, on the gay culture, Hispanics. Yes, we have women issues. What we're trying to do is get more variety, perspectives from others. My experience is that it's harder to find women than it is to find men. It's very unfortunate and very sad, but women are oppressed themselves in society, and we're trying to support them in their efforts and expose deaf women or girls when they're young. Many people say you need more women, and I said I've tried my best to find the appropriate women to cover these issues. Now Asians, again, we're working on that for next year. We're trying to touch base with as many issues as possible. We've got a lot of years ahead of us, and hopefully we can cover all of those. Maybe question or so right up here. Please, Jerry. I'm sure this is a political one. I'd like to say a dirty word, but I better not because I'm on camera. But 911 in Rochester stinks. I am very angry at the 911 system and the organizations for deaf people. I am a victim. I'm a victim of the situation. I will be doing something about it. I'm considering a possible legal action against 911 and get their ass, clean up their act. Their ass. I'd like to thank you, Matthew, and we'd like to follow up discussion around the corner in room number